So I think you have actually already heard the bios of all the people. So we're going to skip the bios. We're not going to talk about that. But we're going to talk about something that I think is actually really important. And I think the original topic for this was dead-end jobs and how to get out of them. And so I would like to refine that slightly into this concept of taking wise professional risk, okay? And so, it's one of those things, it's like, the person who was the vice chair spoke up earlier, and we all said, oh, that's the best job. It's like you don't know what you got till it's gone, right? But, a part of figuring out where you want to go and what you want to do is, honestly, being willing to take a risk. And that's one of the things that I think that women don't necessarily do very well. And the panel before us really talked about like getting an additional degree or any of those other things. And I would say that you refer back to what Kate was talking about, using your senses, using your eyes and your ears, and actually being attentive and engaged, and doing what I think emergency physicians do incredibly well, which is look at the world around them. And as attendings, we are absolutely excellent at this. I used to sit at attending on the A-side desk at Chapel Hill, and somebody would roll by the desk, and I go, well, they're going to be an admission. You like, come on over here, and like go, and this thing, right? You can just see it, and it, and you can interpret a lot of data. And so what I would encourage you to do at your institution is to deploy those same skills and to begin the process of understanding the game. Because whether you want to admit it or not, whether this is politically unsavory to you or not, academic health centers, business, everything, it's all a game. Do you know, it's all structured around a set of rules, a set of behaviors, a set of mores that drive activity in that space. And quite frankly, this I think is a great quote. It's unbelievable how much you don't know about the game you've been playing all your life. We've been in medicine for how long? We are terminally degreed, right? We've got multiple degrees, we've done all these things, and we don't understand what's actually happening around us. I'm looking at Alice, who's now at the VA and becoming the section chief of emergency medicine there, and she's like sending me these emails, and she's like doing all these things, and I'm like, yeah, Alice is understanding the game. She's in it. And, and that's what you have to do. You really have to begin the process of understanding the decisions that are being made, why those decisions are being made, and how you fit into that space. And therefore, you can plot your path to your next career choice, to your next role. You can decide that you absolutely perfectly happily want to stay exactly where you are and contribute in a different way. But you need to begin to understand the game. And you need to understand your career. You need to understand that there is a career ladder, and it doesn't look as shiny and as perfect as this might, but it's your ladder. And, you got to be careful where you put your ladder up against the wall. You've all seen that cartoon of the guy puts the ladder up against the wall and he climbs to the top and there's nothing at the top of the wall. So be thoughtful about that. And when I say that, what I mean is be granular. Really have a clear, crystal clear understanding about what it is that you want to achieve. What do you need in your life to be happy? Happy. And I didn't say happy at every single moment of every single day. I said happy, mostly happy, accomplished, achieving what you set out to do in medicine or evolved into as you grew. Because quite frankly, I am not the same person who sat in that orthopedic research lab and wrote 19 papers for an orthopedic surgeon, and then, I'm not that person anymore, right? And none of us are. We've all grown. We've been changed by the events that have happened to us, around us, and that decisions that we've made. Some of those decisions were good. Some of those decisions were bad. But it's like I tell my kids, it doesn't matter if you're in a crappy job right now, because in that job are some very tangible skills that you can extract and use to improve your next job. You will become smarter, wiser, and more astute about what it is that you actually need to be happy. And my point on this is that you need to have a vision for what is your personal end game. And we talked about it today, that the end game wasn't necessarily be in the chair. The end game is, for me, it's like, what can I do for my faculty? What can I do for the patients? It's not Cherry Hobgood at an individual bedside that's going to actually enhance patient care. It's Cherry Hobgood who's running 10 emergency departments that are servicing 400,000 patients across the state of Indiana, that are graduating the largest number of residents in the country, and running the largest medical student clerkship in the country, and maybe on the side, you know, trying to reform the practice plan so we can get some maternity and paternity benefits, right? Okay, so that was tooting my own horn, just in case you didn't recognize it. But ultimately, you need to understand how to do that, and so that you don't come off looking like an ass, and maybe I just did, but who knows, you can make your own decision about that. But you need to be able to say, hey, you know, when you're in that elevator with, you know, the CEO, you know, Dennis, I'm really proud that we, you know, our 10 EDs are really kicking it. You know, we saw 400,000 patients last year, and our patient satisfaction is one of the highest in the country. I'm so proud of my team. See you, Dennis, I'm going to the 6th floor. Do you know? And, you know, you've got to be able to do that, and you've got to be able to understand how to do that. And you got to do it with a smile on your face, and it's got to be genuine. It's got to be something that you are passionate about and that you really care about. Because when you are that person, it shows, it comes through, and people understand it, and they say, hey, man, I like working with Cherry. She's good. She gets her work done. We get finished on time. We start on time. We finish on time. She's always got an agenda. It's happened. And then, hey, you know, we can hang out in the parking lot and really have the after meeting if we want to. Because do not neglect the before or after meeting. Very, 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 very important leadership message. The decisions are not made in the meeting. Read Master of the Senate by Lyndon Johnson. You don't have to read the whole thing. It's kind of gross in a lot of parts. However, the first few chapters are actually important, and it talks about how he pushed the civil rights agenda through the Senate. How did he do it? He got his votes. He was a master of counting votes. He counted the votes. And if things really matter to you, you got to individually lobby people, and you got to go get the votes. You know, you got to make that happen. And when you become the person that makes that happen, then you get a lot of options. And when you can get a lot of options, then you get to decide which way you want to go. You know, the path to your ultimate end game isn't necessarily straight. You know, how many people in this room have ever been in a job where they thought it was going to be their absolute end job, and then they realized when they got in it, they just really didn't like it? You know, I was the curriculum dean for the School of Medicine. I was very invested in the educational process. I was really felt passionate about the school. Like Susan, it was my school. I wanted to really make it better. And when I got into this job, you know, I got a lot of opportunity. I had 25 staff, and, you know, and I could really do a lot of stuff. And it was a horrible job. It was an absolutely horrible job. I hated it. I hated it every minute of the day. And I learned some really important things about myself in that job. Number one, I do not like to go to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. I do not like that. It is bad. It is bad for me. I become grumpy. Everyone hates me. I become really, really mean. And, you know, so I know that about myself. My assistant knows, do not schedule anything for Dr. Hobgood before 10 a.m. 10 a.m., that's the time. Because I can get up, I can have my coffee, I can do my work, and then I can check my email and work out if I'm motivated. And then I can go to work, and I can have some more coffee, and I can meet all day, and then I can do my other job, which is go to the board meetings, or go to recruitment dinners, or do those other things. And so my day is typically from 10 in the morning to about 11 at night. That's my day. I didn't know that I didn't like to go to work at 7 in the morning before I became a dean. And then you had to meet at 7 in the morning and 7 o'clock at night, and it was horrible. It was just not fun. I didn't know that I didn't like working with people who really had no power to decide, and therefore they just did a bunch of like whateverness all the time. That was a problem for me, you know, and I didn't really, I didn't know that, you know. How was I to know? Because I'd always worked with emergency docs, and we're like, we got it, we're doing the thing, you know, and unless you've been in that other experience, you don't know these things about yourself or others, right? And so working with the chair group is different, because all those people, while they might be they do at least have the power to decide, and I can compel them to decide, you know, and that's an important thing for you to be able to do. But you've heard a little bit of discussion about tools, and I think tools are really important. And so while I really didn't like that dean job, I got a lot of tools. And I think that one of the things that we think about is that we're going to need a toolbox that looks something like this. We got to have a wrench and we got to have a hammer. Well, taking on 25 staff means that I had to learn a lot about HR. A lot about HR. And let me tell you, what you do a lot of in leadership is HR, a lot of HR. You need to learn a lot about recruitment. You need to learn, again, about budgets. You need to learn about downsizing and upsizing programs. You need to learn about managing up. You need to be able to sell your case. You got some tools. So what you really need to understand is, what do you need in your toolbox? And I would suggest that your toolbox does not look like the one on the previous image, but it needs to look a little more like this. You need a lot of things in your toolbox, and you need to be able to acquire those skills, whether it's from a good job in your mind or a bad job. And you have to be able to extract that learning from every single thing that you do in order to continue to personally grow. And if you don't, you are missing opportunity and you are suffering needlessly. So my point is that you need to figure out, what am I learning from this? And you don't always know it at the time, but when you can give yourself a moment of reprieve and you can step back, then you think about, what did I gain from this? And how can I then articulate that message to move myself into the next position? And honestly, sometimes you just have to hold your nose and do it. You end up doing a bunch of things that you don't really like because you need to know how to do it. Or at least you need to be able to say to somebody, oh yes, I've done that. I understand that. I do understand that. And be able to have a conversation in that space. And you don't have to do it forever, but you might have to do it for a hot minute. And what I heard Azita saying earlier today is, like, when you come into my office and you're undifferentiated but talented, that's a win for me. That's a score. Because I can say, hey, I need you to do this. And you go, oh, that's great. And you go do it. Then the deal is that I'm going to give you additional role, I'm going to give you additional position, and maybe some more money, or certainly protected time. Remember, ladies, time is money. And but what I'm also going to give you is the opportunity to acquire some skills. And one of the skills that women often don't acquire, because we are often very benevolent, and we believe that, you know, education is important, and I built my entire career on education, and that is a great place. But it doesn't often convey the line of authority that many people in the C-suite think that you need to convey. That's why clinical operations jobs are often more highly valued than residency program director jobs. And, you know, and you need to think about why that is. Why is that? Because you're really managing the money. You're actually doing the things that the people in the C-suite value. And so that's what I mean when I talk about looking back, look at the world around you and begin to understand the game. The game is, the ED needs to function, it needs to function efficiently, or whatever entity within your hospital system needs to function efficiently, and you need to understand what they're looking for. If your hospital's a lean hospital, you need to participate in some lean things. You need to put some belts on, you know, and acquire those things, even if you're holding your nose to do it, because ultimately at the end of the day, you know, that's just a place that you are passing through, that you're going on to the next step and the next step and the next step, and you have to be thoughtful about that. And then, you know, you also have to realize, you know, sometimes if you don't sacrifice what you want, you are the sacrifice, because the biggest sacrifice you could ever make to yourself is giving up on yourself and giving up on your personal dreams for what you could achieve and what you would be. So in my opinion, you know, there are really no dead-end jobs. There are no jobs with no outlets. Do you know? You have to really then think about, again, what is it that you want to do? And then how do you define a dead-end job? How do you know when you've peaked out in that particular role or it's not a good fit? The idea is, are there limited growth opportunities? Are you actually going to learn what you need to learn in that space, intellectually, fiscally? Do you get the leadership skills that you need? And you need to really interrogate that reality before you say yes or before you bail out, and figure out what you need, because you can often leverage yourself. If you're in a bad job, it's pretty likely that most of the people who are around you know that you're in a bad job. And they recognize that what you're doing is actually service. And that you can say, gosh, you know, you're killing me over here. I'm doing all this and I'm not really making any progress, and have that meaningful conversation with your leadership and with the team to be able to say, I need more leadership development. I need to go back and get a degree. I need these things in order to be more effective in this role, or to move into the next space, or to be able to cultivate the person who's going to come behind me. And, you know, oftentimes you can actually negotiate a better job from within a bad job if you understand what it is that you need. What else makes a job a bad job? If you're stuck, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many people are like waiting in queue, like, right, they're waiting in queue for the person who's ahead of them to get out of the queue because they can only see themselves about moving in this one particular place. And, you know, you can skip a tier. I mean, it's sometimes risky to skip a tier, but you can certainly do it. But, you know, you have to be thoughtful about that. If that's the only way that you can go, then like you need to open your aperture up and look at the other things that are in your space and say, what can I do that, again, puts more tools in my toolbox and allows me then to actually actualize my personal vision for myself. And sometimes, you know, your institution just lacks vision. Sometimes you're just in the wrong place. To Angela's earlier question about, you know, where, you know, what do you do when you're feel like, you know, your closed door, slam head against the wall, open door, smile? Do you know, like what do you do when you're in that? You might be in the wrong place. They might like a vision for you, and they might like a vision for the role. They might just, frankly, just not care. I got so many other things over here that this is such a low tier. To you, it seems very important, but it may not be. It may be extremely low on their priority list. And, you know, and again, that is one of the, I think, potential traps of educational roles, is that the dean really cares about education as long as the LCME is coming. And when the LCME is not coming, the dean cares about research and the clinical operations. So, I mean, that's the game we're in. And it doesn't mean that those roles aren't valuable, and you have to make a personal decision as to whether or not you value it. Does it enrich you? Is it what you want to do? And if it is, then it's not a dead end, and it's a good place to be, and it's a great place to work. But you do need to understand that. And I know that that could be offensive to many people in this room, but I'm putting it out there because I want you to be aware, and I want you to be cognizant of the decisions that you're making, because they are your decisions, it is your life, and it is your career, and you have to manage it. So the other thing is, if it doesn't bring you joy, it's a dead end. If you are not happy doing the work, it's not a good job for you. It's not a good fit. It's not something that enhances you, and you have to be thoughtful about it. And let me tell you about some bad bosses. Lord have mercy. There is nothing worse than a bad boss. And if there was ever anything that I learned in, you know, some of these other dean's office jobs, is that, you know, having a good boss is probably the most important thing that you could have. And so when I was looking for chair jobs, I was absolutely looking for resources, and I was looking for a good place to live and all things like that, good place for my, you know, kids to go to high school, etc. But what I was really looking for was a good boss. I was looking for somebody who got me, who understood me, and that we had a shared common values and was going to resource me and what we collectively wanted to do. So my discussions and my topics and my interview discussion points were all around, you know, what do you see as, you know, the role for emergency medicine in this institution? How do you support your chairs? You know, and really trying to interrogate that reality very deeply, because having a bad boss is misery at every single level. And sometimes, you know, and I mean, I've lived through 8 deans and the variety of different roles in my time in academic medicine. And, you know, sometimes you're like, oh, Lord, please do not let me have to break in another dean. I do not want to break in another dean. But sometimes you have to, and you have to do it by bringing your A game, being in there and being prepared and being thoughtful about it. And so this relates to your chair, your division chief, whoever that is. You need to understand that person. You need to understand what drives them. And sometimes, frankly, you have to manipulate them a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to lie, you do. That's the truth. Do that in a value-driven way to accomplish what your goals are and to meet your needs. But if they want you to do X, Y, or Z, then the answer is maybe you'll do X, Y, or Z, but you're going to do it with some quid pro quo. If I'm doing A, B, and C for you, then C, D, and E are going to be for me. And so having that discussion and being empowered to make that dialogue is really important. So that means you have to understand the coin of the realm. What makes chairs happy? What makes bosses happy? What do they need? What are their institutional goals? What's going to get them a bonus? You need to understand all those things, and when you don't understand them, then you're going to come up short. And when you do, you'll be successful because you'll be speaking their talk and their language, and it'll work. So here's a little rubric about, what you should do. You got a good job with a bad boss, get ready to leave, right? But if you got a good job with a good boss, you can stay and prosper. If you've got a bad job with a good boss, maybe you can fix it, right? Maybe you can actually have a conversation to say, hey, this is a really bad job, and can we collectively work together to make this job either more intellectually stimulating for me, show me that I've got a career path, do whatever. But if you got a bad boss and a bad job, then just cut it. Just go. And you say, well, honestly, if it's a bad job and you got a bad boss, then what are you going to do with that? They're not going to be interested in talking to you about it. They're not really interested in fixing it, or they already would. So then, really, this kind of a thing is often helpful to help you make decisions. And when you determine that you got to go, you got to go. You just got to go. So then how the hell do you get out, right? How do you go? Well, this was my preferred method, which was an extraction. I needed to be extracted. So it just depends on what you're being extracted from, right? So I was in the dean's office. I decided I got to go. I can't keep doing this. And so I went to my chair and I said, how would you like a really good vice chair for education? I can kill it. And he said, that'd be great. I'd really like for you to do that. And so he extracted me, which was great. And but again, that depends on you having a relationship with those people and keeping those people informed and actually having mentors and moving forward with that conversation. The other approach is, you can hop up, right? Move up to the next job. Now, you can see that the size of this next bowl is large. You might hit it, you might hit it, and it will be a full-on body slam, and you will slide to the floor, and you might flop around. But you have to think about that. You can say, I could make it into that next bowl, or I could just stay back in this bowl, but you got to try. And so my point on this is you got to try. You can move to a different institution, you can move to a different job, you can do whatever it is that you need to do as long as you're willing to take a risk. But let's really assess the risk equation here. Who in this room is not terminally degreed? No one. Right. Who in this room's salary, as we have previously learned, is not tied to their MD degree? No one's. So with that, what is your risk? 0. You could go back to being a clinical doctor and you'd be just fine. So your risk profile is relatively low. It might not be exactly what you want to do at that particular hot minute, but at the end of the day, your family's not going to go without shoes. You're not going to get kicked out of your house. You might have to work a little bit harder, but then you can regroup. You got plenty of time to regroup and then figure out where you're going from there. You can go back to school. You can say, I have made a command level decision to go back and get a different degree. I am now exiting stage left. Do you know, this time in my life, I need a growth spurt. That was great. I love it. I need a growth spurt. And I'm going to go back to school so that I can spurt. You can, like I said, go back to working in clinical emergency medicine because sometimes you just have to do it, right? At the end of the day, we all went to medical school because we wanted to be a doctor. So go back, see patients. It's not a big deal. You can do that. It's not beneath you. It is, it might not be exactly what you want to do at the time, but like I said, it gives you a hot minute to regroup, and that's a really important thing to be able to do. But the main thing is you got to have some resilience. You got to realize that sometimes you're going to be in a place and things are going to be really, really dark, and people are going to do things to you that you could never imagine doing to anyone. And you were like, seriously? Did this just actually happen to me? Seriously? Really? That's what you think? Seriously? And the answer to that is, yeah. Yeah, that did just happen. And then you've got to rise up like the phoenix from the ashes and show them who you really are. Do you know? And I think that's a really important trait and a really important concept. And I think women are very, very good at it because for the most part, we've got our heads screwed on straight. We value our families, we value our work, and we value ourselves. We might not necessarily express it in the same way that men do, but that core value is there. Otherwise, we couldn't even be sitting in this room. And so when the days get dark and the pavement's cracked, look for your inner flower because it's about to bloom. And then, when you look at that resilience, think about what's it going to take. It really does take a lot of the things that you've heard already. It takes composure. It takes calm, cool, collected reasoning. It takes strategy and a vision personally for yourself. And you've got to have some friends who are going to collaborate with you and who are going to help lift you up. And you have got to be tenacious, because if you're not, you know, the pavement's just going to get hotter. And you got to look after yourself. And this is something that women do particularly poorly. That we do not take care of ourselves. We take care of our families, we take care of all our people in our clinical environments, but we don't necessarily take care of ourselves. And so you've really got to be thoughtful about that, and, you know, eat well and sleep and exercise and do all those things. And when you do those things, you will feel better about yourself and you'll feel better about your life. And again, you will be prepared to spring up and go forth into the next place. So in my mind, there really are no dead-end jobs. They're just different paths. And you have to figure out what you're going to take from each one of those places on the path and then move forward to the place that you really want to be. But mostly, you want to be happy. So with that, I'll stop.
It's a drop the mic. I think we're done. So what questions after that kind of, I think, very inspiring talk? Go ahead.
So my question is, you know, you've made the decision you're going to leave a job, and you obviously don't want to go out in a ball of fire, but you also want to point out some of the things that might have driven you to leave so that you can improve them for the people that are going to stay behind. How do you bring that up, and you know, how far do you push it, especially if it's your boss that you like what level?
What do you think, ladies? Are you going to push it? Push up, down.
For the record,
I think it depends if there's systems issues or personnel issues. So I think with personnel issues, you're going to have to tread very carefully, unfortunately, because often what I've noticed is when women raise a personality issue, it becomes, well, they can't, they're fighting, they can't get along, as opposed to, no, he was just a dick, right? Like, that's not, and so I think if it's systems issues, then your purity of intention is so clear that you can. So I've always advocated for bringing, shining the light on systems issues that need to get fixed. As far as personnel issues, the fact that a good person is leaving is enough said.
I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and where you're going. If you are staying regionally in a system where there's still going to be interaction in the city, or, you know, between residency programs, or even if you're moving to a different area of the hospital, you don't want to be volatile and inflammatory. You want to be professional, and you want to use factual. Has anybody read Crucial Accountability? It's a fantastic book for having really difficult conversations that really speak to shared purpose and giving people safe spaces to have these kinds of conversations. So it really just depends. I mean, there are sometimes when nothing said is really the appropriate way to go. If you have a, you know, a real, I think, genuine, non-emotional way of giving good feedback, then the person may not be receptive to it. I mean, they may not really care. So you have to be willing to understand that that might be your audience if you attempt to do that sort of thing. But, you know, if you decide to make an exit, do it for you. Don't do it to teach people a lesson. That's silly, right? This is about you. It's about your fit. It's about your functionality. It's about your goals. It's really not about the place that you're leaving anymore. It's really about you making that determination and putting yourself in a more functional, more satisfying position. I was going to talk for a second in a much less entertaining fashion about career cycles, because I think those are important. So both organizations and individuals have cycles, and it's very important that you know something about the length of your cycle, because I think it will help you to evaluate next steps in a very concrete way. For me, I know that my cycle is maximum 8 years, usually more like 6 to 7 years in terms of my ability to function and be excited and energetic and giving my all to a particular role. And that if I could draw it, it would be easy to see because it would be an upslope and then there would be sort of a plateau, and then beyond that is really a time that could be destructive, where you're no longer effective in a position. And organizations have that same kind of maturity over a number of years. And so you've got to always assess where you're at on the curve, and that can tell you a lot about that it may not even be the job, it may be your own biological or social cultural kind of adaptation to a particular organization, and where you're at can tell you a lot about how you have to plan. So at least for me, and this may be true of some of you in the room, 2 years before I hit that plateau, I'm thinking very strategically about what I'm going to do to prepare for the next role, because if I stay in that role too long, that's going to be problematic. So succession planning is not something that we've talked about, but I think lack of succession planning leads to a lot of people feeling that they really are in dead-end roles. The fact of the matter is the organization benefits tremendously from somebody else being in that role. Leaving a role behind, you have to be willing to say a new person can bring a lot of different stuff to that role that I couldn't bring because I was done in my cycle, or I finished what I started to do. So I think there's, having that exit conversation, you have to really look back and say, somebody else might even do a better job than I did in that role, and you have to be willing to accept that in your own replenishment and reinvention and cycling of your career, because it is really a long haul. It's not something that you evaluate over like a 1 to 2 year time frame.
Going along that, one thing that I did learn in business school was the best way to get a promotion is to make yourself dispensable in the position you're in. And kind of the metaphor they gave is if there's a C-suite and an opening's opened up, they're going to look at the service line leaders, and if you are define that service line or the end-all be-all of that service line, they're not going to disrupt it by promoting you. They're going to go to the other service line where it also has a good leader, but there's a team behind them. That place won't fall apart. So the more power you give away, the more you do succession planning. It's also helping you then potentially do that early foray. So I'm still a chair, but now I'm sitting at dean's meetings, or I'm going to be a dean proxy or health systems. You can almost get a preview to that next job before you do that curve jumping.
Other questions? Yeah.
So what do you do if you're at your institution and you've been typecast into a specific role, and now let's say you're mid-career and you want to pivot out of it? What advice do you give that person?
Well, here, I'll answer it, because that actually recently happened to one of my faculty members, where she was I had her in succession plan to become the next program director, and she wanted to pivot from education to medical direction. And the best thing is she told me about it. She didn't sit there and get resentful sitting in the education bucket. She came and told me initially. I was like, are you sure? You're just so close. You can capitalize at that end role. It'd be a huge growth opportunity. And she's like, no, I'm committed. I was like, well, now that I know this, let me find, when the opportunity comes up, you'll be my next go-to person. And the VA section chief position came up, and I kind of grabbed her and moved her over. You almost always have to do a lateral move, not a promotion move. And that's okay. I think sometimes lateral moves where you're going from one kind of functional unit to another functional unit, you pick up kind of a breadth of experience that'll be valuable and ultimately.
I think that's why you want to always be extending outside of the department as well as within the department. It's great for us all to have collaborators within our department, but the more connections you can make, bridges to other ways of doing things, other important skill sets, other resources in the institution on the whole, you're just broadening your opportunity by doing so. I think it also depends on what reasoning do you have behind wanting to make a change like that. It could be extraordinarily well thought out, and it could be a true, motivated by passion. I saw this problem, and I've been working in the residency, but I saw this problem in clinical operations, and I just now have decided that this is where I want to spend my energy. That can be extraordinarily authentic, and go for it. But a lot of times people use those excuses because they see a faction or a subset of faculty doing that thing in the department, and that happens to be associated with less clinical time or some other form of stature, and then they try to make that move to be in that role. Well, if you haven't padded the pathway with the skill set to do it, it isn't going to be effective if you make that choice. So yeah, it has to be really well reasoned, and it's not impossible. I told you guys I did that. I was very much invested in the educational process in the department, and I found something I loved, and I was able to parlay that into something that happened to have been more valued and more effective in my own institution. That is not the case everywhere. I don't want people to think that. But it has to be for the right reasons.
I'd be curious to know if you've ever heard of anybody taking I don't know what the opposite of lateral is, but a sort of downward step in terms of, I'll give you an example. I've been in the same position 8 years. My cycle's 5 years. I'm suicidal. I've told everybody I can think of at every place I've gone that I'm dying and I can't do this any longer, and they just keep letting me do it. There doesn't seem a way out other than to go to business school and lose a whole bunch of money. Sort of pay a whole bunch of money. And I'm almost wondering if I should just go back, just be like, put me in the shifts, just put me in the shifts, not knowing what's going to happen, just that I'll at least not be there. And then if so, if it would be at my institution or another institution, just to sort of start fresh. Because I'm pretty sure I could do amazing things, but I think I've been typecast.
So I think that's a fabulous idea. So remember when I said when I first started, it was 50% on the clinical track so that I could define what I wanted to do. That's basically what you're saying. You're going to be overqualified, for the position you're taking, or kind of what Sherry said, which is, I'm going to be the best vice chair of education you've ever had. And it's okay. It gives you the hot minute to recruit.
No, I do think that's okay. I think that, again, you have to think about, if you're not getting any joy out of that role, then, it's time for you to do something differently and be very thoughtful about it. But I think, I do think it's often more difficult for women to move from institution to institution unless you're in a place like, that's got 5 or 6 different shops in one town, because you can't uproot your whole family. Like, there are certain windows that, you can take that you can actually move, where, when I said, I think I'm ready to start looking for a chair job, it was when, my one son was going off to college and my other son was going to high school, and he needed a much better high school situation than he was in, and so I was able to shoot that gap, but it had to be very strategic. So if you have the capacity to move, don't sell yourself short. There are people looking for talented leaders, and there are people looking for talented female leaders. And I think, honestly, if you can, kind of, again, put your package together and think about what it is that you're bringing to the table and be able to articulate that, and then look for other roles, I think that's perfectly fine. But if it doesn't work and you can't move and you know that you can't, then, think about saying, all right, I'm kind of done with this. I'm going to go back to do clinical work, or I'm going to split my job with somebody who's going to take over half these responsibilities, and I'm going to go do clinical work, and we're going to grow this other person up in that other space. And you maybe be able to retain the parts of your job that you like and hand off the parts of your job that you don't, meanwhile that you're transitioning to something else. But I would start a tour, and I'd start shaking hands and knocking on doors, and hey, and see what you can do. So, more questions in the back?
Yeah. I'm curious if each of you in your chair position, actually for all the chairs in the group, when you have created systems out of chaos, at what point do you think about your own opportunities of growth? And what kind of opportunities are you exploring after being chair?
Yeah, it just depends. I think, a lot of it depends on when you're really kind of, if you know what your cycle is. I am perfectly happy. My cycle can be either very, very short or very long, as long as I feel like I'm doing meaningful work and that I have what I see as a trajectory for meaningful work. As Susan said earlier about the fact that she's a builder, and what she really learned about herself was that she liked to build things. I also really like to build things, and I'm very tenacious. I'm competitive as all hell, and so I think that, I'm like, we're going to be the #1 Department of Emergency Medicine in the country, and that's what we're going to do, and we're going to win it on all fronts. And game on, ladies. This is what I'm telling you, right? So that as long as we're building and we have the opportunity, and it's the positives are still outweighing the negatives. But you kind of start getting a sense when the negatives start creeping up on the positives, and, it doesn't seem like you're doing on a daily basis what you really like, and your joy is being diminished, or you just feel like it's time to move on because it's time for somebody else, then that's okay. But every single day that you are working, it's just like, when do you start managing up? The day that you walk in the door. When do you start planning for your next move? The day you walk in the door. Because every single thing that you're doing should be putting tools in your toolbox that are, strategically acquired assets that you are then going to use to be able to leverage yourself into your next position, because you may not know when that's ever going to come. I told you I've had 8 deans. I mean, we had a little scare recently that we were going to lose our dean, and that caused me to have palpitations. But breaking in a new dean is tough work, and sometimes if you don't like the person, or they don't have the same vision that you do about the work that you're doing, then your life can go from being very good to being very bad very quickly. And so it's very important for you to keep your Vita up to date, put all the things on it, like really make a list of your accomplishments, the things that you've done, so they're actually able to talk about them, because you forget them. You forget those things.
2 things, because Sherry said this twice. Does the audience know what she means by breaking in a new dean? No. See, to me, my equivalent is breaking in a new COO. I've had to replace 5 COOs and break them in. That means, as our integral part of our leadership position is to advocate on behalf of our unit. We can't advocate on behalf of our unit unless they understand how valuable we are. So breaking a new dean, and you can explain it to me, is now I have to debrief this person. Now I have to explain to them where we've been, where we're going, how we add value, what our budget looks like, where I want to go, how I add value, our institutional history. So that breaking in a new boss, so that they then have that same value of your unit that the prior one does, is actually pretty taxing. Is that what you meant?
It's a lot of work. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of work, but then you have to do that before you can actually get to the meaningful conversation about what you actually want to do next. And so that's where the relationship with your chair or your section chief or whoever comes into play. You have to have that person really understanding what you're doing on a daily basis in a nuanced way, so that, the question that you had earlier about how am I going to move out of this role, they need to understand what your skills are and what you're bringing to the table, so that when they say, I need somebody who can do this, they automatically think of you, because you've done a good job of managing up. You've done a good job of making sure they know what you can do.
I think far too often we wait for the idea of advancement when it's suddenly in a crisis phase. So we're unhappy in a position, we feel like we've overstayed our welcome, we're not effective in this particular role any longer. If you look for signals while you're in a job, the best time everybody says to be looking for a job is when you're really happy, because you're a more receptive, open, inquiring person, and you're thinking about your advancement. So if you can look for signals in your environment while you're in a good situation, that's very helpful. So as chair, I was very fortunate to interface with public safety, with student health, with facilities management, with the provost's office in a role that I had around the human research mission. And I began to see how much I just adored being on the university side of things. I loved interfacing with the different vice provosts. I loved talking to the director of student health. I loved knowing what was going on in student affairs. And it took me way out beyond the medical school. And I began to feel quite comfortable and interested in maybe making that career deviation. Took courage to think about making a leap like that. It's always hard. I think there's a lot of courage involved when you're in a role and you're humming along. It's really tough, and it's even harder when you're in a bad situation. So I think looking for those signals in your environment as to what appeals for you, I think is really the way to think about advancement, rather than seeing it as a dead end.
So going back to what Jill just said, which is, kind of the best time to leave is when you're on that high and you're still feeling good. It's also probably the time you're going to get your best references. And at the level that you're looking for movement, it's maybe a little bit about your CV. The other is what your boss is going to say about you. Is this person the one who's going to deliver, or is this person who's gotten a whole bunch of trumped up things on their CV? Going back to Sherry's paradigm of those 4 things, I just want to say that what I define as a good boss, and you should define it for yourself, but to me the best bosses have been good sponsors. So not the day-to-day mentorship. I've previously spoken about mentors versus sponsors, but that person who actually enjoys kind of lifting you up, that person who wants you to succeed, and your success is going to be their success, that's kind of what you should seek for in a good boss.
Okay, I don't want to sound like an alcoholic, but we have to go to tastings. So I have a few final points. Thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause, please? The after meeting is going to be at Tastings. It's on 50 West Washington Street. Basically, you walk out of here and you turn right and you just go. And it's 6 minutes away. Let's see. I have to tell you a couple things. We have the A1 business meeting. So on your tags, if you have a lunch tag, it's not Thursday. There was a typo. It's actually on Wednesday. And the business meeting part is from 7 to 9. There's a luncheon at noon. And then there's another business meeting from 3 to 4. And then there's a session on imposter syndrome at 4 o'clock. And at 5 o'clock tomorrow night is the Jeopardy that Jeanette is doing during the opening ceremony. And I will tweet out the books that were listed in today's session. I will tweet them out so you will see them, because there were a bunch of books that were mentioned. And that's it. Enjoy your day. Thanks so much.